Welcome to the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. My name is Lauren Wells, here with my co-host, Chris Seveney. We're committed to providing you with the knowledge required to build wealth through real estate investing. Tired of consuming content about real estate? Stuck in analysis paralysis? Ready to do your first deal? As a member of our community, you will learn how to go from consuming content to taking that first step into the world of real estate investing. Our show is not about getting rich quick, but about providing you with the knowledge you need to take action. Join us as we speak with experienced investors who share action tips on how to escape the corporate world, start a thriving side hustle in the world of real estate, and go beyond your W-2 or 401k.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. I am your host, Chris Seveney, and today I have a special guest. I have Russ Morgan with Wealth Without Wall Street, and a little bit about them. Wealth Without Wall Street, can't speak today. Wealth Without Wall Street is an online community that seeks to re-educate business owners and families and how money truly works. Their goal is to teach people how to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. So Russ, thanks for being on today. How are you today?
Chris, man, thanks so much for having me. It's always a good time to be with you.
Yes. So Russ and I probably known each other, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I'm guessing now.
Sounds right.
That met them at a conference and through a colleague. And one of the things I enjoy about having Russ on the show today is really talking about what they do and how they can assist other people out there. And the reason I got interested is when people look at, as you get older in life and realize most people are invested in Wall Street, and it's typically through their 401k or some retirement plan, you realize as you start getting older, that's not going to get you where you need it to be or where you want it to be. So you got to start looking at alternatives. And Russ and his partner, Joey, created fabulous programs, education, content, recently just wrote a book. So I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, Russ.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're right. The 401k is oftentimes a big, huge debate point for people when they see our brand, because we kind of stand out there. We say, unfortunately, your baby's ugly, which is hard to hear, right? Like, it's so hard when so many of us who held jobs within the W-2 workspace where we built income or built, wealth inside of these 401k plans, for someone to say that a 401k is the worst tool to be used if you're trying to become financially free. And our brand stands on that. And it's specifically because we believe freedom, financial freedom in particular, is when you have more passive income than you have monthly expenses. And so every single thing that we look at of what you're doing with money has to go through that lens. And if you're not getting closer to financial freedom, I mean, if you're not building a passive income stream, if you're not reducing a monthly expense with what you're doing with money, then you're inherently getting further away from what you say you want. And I think people really want to be financially free, not so that they can sit around on a beach necessarily, but they can pursue the things that they're passionate about, pursue their purpose. At least that's what the thousands of people who join our community tell us, is that they want to be able to do more of what they want to instead of the things that they have to. And I think, we've heard that too oftentimes, even for us entrepreneurs, people who've created businesses, that even our jobs, I think Michael Gerber coined it whenever he was talking in the E-Myth about how that person who was a great technician opened up their business, but had to become the manager and become the entrepreneur, and really got bogged down with all the things they were doing. And they started to hate having to do all those things. And so Joey and I's goal is to help people, not just anybody, 1 million people. That's our goal, help 1 million people who want to become financially free, get there faster. And we wrote a book called 3 Steps to Freedom Through Passive Income. Wealth Without Wall Street's the title, and love to chat about it.
Yeah. And what's interesting that you mentioned is the definition of financial freedom, because a lot of people will think about it as, oh, I just want to sit on a beach and not have to do anything. And that's really not the case. For example, I went and started my own business several years ago, and I have a team and I run a company. So I still work, but I view myself as financially free because I can do what I want. And I still invest outside of Wall Street and invest in alternatives, but it allows people to go do what they want. If I wanted to go golfing this morning, I can do that. If, I want to take my son somewhere, I think that's where a lot of people get mixed up sometimes in that definition of freedom that you say. So Tell us a little bit more about, wealth without Wall Street. You mentioned that, 401k is, the enemy, enemy of the state. But tell us a little bit more about, the group and what it is that you do.
Yeah, I'm gonna touch on really quickly. I feel like I'm like one of the presidential candidates in a debate that it's like I know you asked me this question. I'm going back to the other question, right? You mentioned something that we actually put in the book, and that was around the concept of an ideal day. I think too oftentimes we picture what financial freedom would look like, and we imagine the day or week that we've spent in the past, and we go, oh, that would be amazing, right? That if I could just go back to that location, go back to that situation, I would enjoy that forever. And while going to the beach or taking our kids to go do A, B, or C, or us going and playing golf or whatever, those typically have great memories and they're ideal days, but it's not an ideal lifestyle. And I think there's a difference. We talk about that in the book, the difference between an ideal lifestyle and an ideal day, because sometimes the things that you enjoy doing once, you might not enjoy doing it every single day. Imagine playing golf every single day. That would get a little bit old, right? I mean, I've been around some professional golfers. They tell me that gets old,
Oh, yeah.
right? I mean, now they get paid really well for it, and we wouldn't get paid for it. So I think it would get old. And I think that that's the objective, right? Is to figure out what our ideal lifestyle would be so that then we could build our processes and system to get us closer to being able to spend more time doing that thing. Now, what does Wealth Without Wall Street do? What does it live for? Well, it is intended to really uncover and highlight a lot of the, miscommunications or myths that exist in the financial industry. One, because Joey and I come from the financial markets, right? So he was worked at a big bank, worked in the mortgage industry. I was a certified financial planner, worked in the financial advisory space. So all of the things that we kind of rail on, we do it honestly, knowing that we were a part of that problem early on. And we look at to see like, what are the things that people are doing with money that's not getting them any closer? Like one of the things we say a lot is that the biggest obstacle to becoming financially free, Chris, is lack of access to cash. And I mean, I could have as many good deals. Lifetime deals come around twice a week, right? Like a deal of a lifetime literally comes around twice a week, but most people don't see them because they don't have access to cash. They don't even know, they're not even looking. So it just passes right past their nose. So we learned that through a process called infinite banking. It was something that I literally fell headfirst into at a conference, didn't know what I was doing. I met the author of the book. He happened to be living in my hometown. So when I got back to Birmingham, Alabama, was where I lived. I looked him up. I spent, 10 years basically being mentored by him, understanding how do I unlock my cash, get it in a place I can control it. And then the thing that we started doing is realizing that once we had access to cash, then we needed to become a better investor. I think it's Kiyosaki who says that, there's no good or bad investments. There's just good and bad investors. And I didn't know how to be a good investor. You would think, oh, Russ, you're trained, to be, you're a certified financial planner. You spend all this time in investing in the markets. You should be an excellent investor. Well, I knew how to read, charts. I knew how to read and determine between alpha, beta, and standard deviation, and to be able to look and see the tenure of the fund manager on the project. But I mean, outside of that, I really didn't know a whole lot. And I specifically didn't know what to do with money. I had no idea how to buy notes or, really how to have investment real estate or to really own businesses that could be passive income streams. And I had to start learning. And so we interviewed guys like yourself on the podcast, and we've done now, I don't know, 550 or 560 episodes. And through that process, we learned that there's so many different ways to build passive income, and not every way was intended for me to do. And so we built out this process called the Investor DNA. We talk about that in our book as well, of how God uniquely made each one of us, and that we can see the world through that certain lens. And so then we go and analyze the different types of deals that are out there based upon our personality styles, the way that we would, things we'd like, things we wouldn't like, the key factors are going to be included. And we took that down and made this passive income matrix, which helps simplify the process for someone who's getting started, someone who's been just putting money in the 401k and never taken a step to invest in anything outside of that, where they wouldn't be overwhelmed by the number of things, but could really narrow down the process to one or two ideas that they could go deep on. And then we said, hey, we've got to build a community around it, people that are doing this, because you're going to be the weird person in the room when you're pursuing passive income. You're going to be the one doing the opposite of what everybody else is doing. And it's going to be uncomfortable for most people, right? The inconvenient truth is just really not something that people want to participate in. They would rather be in the line of people doing exactly the wrong thing as long as they're with the herd. And so when you tell somebody, hey, I don't put money in a 401k, they're like, what? Why wouldn't you? Hey, you tell someone that, while debt freedom is good for you, it's not my pursuit, because debt freedom doesn't equal financial freedom. My objective is to have more passive income than monthly expenses. So everything that I do in that lens. And people are like, oh my goodness. Wait till you tell them that you're putting money in a whole life insurance like I do. We've been putting, large six figures year over year over year into whole life insurance and building these cash values. And people are like, oh, you must be a moron. Right? All these things, you become really, really weird. But what I've learned is that if you want to be uncommon, like you want to have uncommon success, you want to have uncommon lifestyles, you need to do what the 1% does and not the 99%, right? So like, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not doing something that no one else is doing. We're just following what the 1% are doing instead of the 99%.
Yeah, two things I'll want to touch on. One is, like you mentioned, the whole life insurance, like real estate investors. That's like, again, people say whole life. It's like, or who's the Dave,
Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey, yeah, oh, you get him on whole life. It's like, oh my God. One thing though, I want to jump back on. So two things I want to just touch upon, and then I want you to talk a little bit about infinite banking. You mentioned the investor DNA, and I think that's so critical because I see so many people out there that are like, oh, I see this person doing it, so I want to do it. Well, just because, that person can do it doesn't mean you can, like LeBron James can go play basketball. I'm not going to go pursue basketball because I'm 5'9". Like, it's not happening. There's also that same thing when you're looking at investment strategies. Certain people, for example, I invest in defaulted mortgage notes. If you're a type of person who is not conflict oriented, then it's not a business you should be in because you're always dealing with lawyers and having to be a little aggressive. The other thing I wanted to just touch upon is you mentioned, passive investing, and people really need to understand what passive means. Passive means not owning 4 rentals from 300 miles away, trying to manage them. I think people really misconstrued what passive investing means compared to you're an active investor investing in, again, I'm just going to use real estate as an example, but passive investing means somebody else is doing all the work for you. Well, that's how I define it anyways. But I just wanted to make those comments and then jump back a little bit to let people know a little bit more about infinite banking, because it is one of those things that the media never talks about because everyone always wants you to put your money in a 401k.
Yeah. So I will touch on the passive investing thing. In order for it to be passive for you means it has to be active for someone else. Yeah. And just because you're active in it right now doesn't mean it's always active, right? Like maybe you do the work up front and it becomes passive for you over time. And I think being involved, so passive doesn't mean uninvolved. And I think that even when I invest in mortgage notes with you, right, it took time for me to gain a relationship with you, to understand through our conversations what it was I investing in. And through that, like, I need to be able to inspect what I expect. Otherwise, I'm just in a different type of Wall Street, if you will. And we believe Wall Street is as much a mindset as it is an actual location or investment. It's the way that we think. And I think your audience knows that, but that's a key thing that people, we've become this easy button society that we just want things super easy. Yeah. And we turn off the work hard ethic and just we'll assume that we'll get it for free by just this one little easy button or taking this pill or whatever it may be. And it doesn't work that way. But going to infinite banking is definitely a unique tool, a unique process. And for those who you're hearing this for the first time, it comes out of a book called Becoming Your Own Banker. And the author was an elder, he died in his mid 80s. He was an economist, used to be a forester, and he determined through personal experience, because he started putting money into life insurance policies. His brother was a life insurance agent early on. Ultimately, after his forestry consulting days, he ended up getting a life insurance industry business. But he was investing in real estate. And it came to a time in the early 80s where we think today interest rates are high. That was actually the low watermark in the early 80s, right? Interest rates went from around 8.5% to 23.5% over like a 18-month period of time. And there he was sitting owing $500,000 at the time on some rental property or some real estate, and his expense went significantly higher. Now, you go back 30, 40 years from now, that's a lot of money. Well, he was trying to figure out how is he going to get himself out of that scenario. Well, he knew the banks were not the answer. He had to be able to go and access private capital. Well, he realized that he'd been putting large amounts of money in standards relationship to his income into life insurance cash values, which operate very similar to equity in a house, meaning I make a premium payment on insurance policy. It's like making a principal payment on a mortgage. I'm building up equity. The difference is you're building it in a life insurance contract, and as compared to a home. And so he could access and could go borrow against that cash value at interest rates somewhere between 5 and 8%, which were a fraction of what the going rate was. And he was like, the only problem is I don't have $500,000 of cash value to be able to get rid of the banks, right?
Yeah.
He only had a portion of that. And he thought, oh, well, I could solve this problem if I would just increase my premiums so that my cash values would increase, so that then I could get rid of the banks. And then now I could pay back the institution which I'm an owner of, because the insurance companies that we do business with are owned only by the policyholders. So then you're participating in the profit. And so the idea of infinite banking starts out of this idea that we all have a need for cash, that we finance everything we buy, whether we pay cash, we borrow someone else's money. We're always dealing with borrowed money. And the difference is who controls that function? Who's the banker in your life? And I started implementing this into my life back in 2009. I saw firsthand like this going through. I'll give you an example if it's okay.
Yep.
My wife was a dentist. She actually opened her dental practice December 28th of 2008. And we were sitting there borrowing, I don't know, $750,000 to, do the whole build out, to buy all the equipment. I mean, it's expensive to start a dental practice. And we went to Bank of America, #1 dental lender out there. And her father at the time, we had a large amount of cash sitting in the bank because we had just went through the crash and we had liquidated his accounts. So we had all these stop losses on different account stocks that he had. And he's sitting there in cash. And I'm reading this book called Becoming Your Banker that says that the banks take your money and they lend it out to people and they earn the difference in the middle. And he said, oftentimes they lend it out to you or someone that you know with your own money, but yet they only give you a percentage of what they're earning. And I was like, this is happening right now. My father-in-law is sitting here with large 7 figures sitting in a checking account earning, 0.5% maybe. And here's my wife paying 7.95% on this dental loan debt. And I thought, wow, all we have to do is cut out the middleman in this transaction. And so I went to my father-in-law and I said, what if I could guarantee you a 7.95% return on your money? And he said, guaranteed? I said, guaranteed, less than a 1% default rate. And I said, by the way, you'll like the borrower. He's like, who is it? I said, it's your daughter. He said, what do you mean? I said, all we're going to do is take the money out of this account. We're going to pay off Bank of America, in essence, refinance the debt. And she's going to now pay you that payment that she's making, that's a couple, $6,000, whatever it was a month. And she's going to make it to you for the next 15 years instead of Bank of America. He goes, we can do that? I was like, absolutely, we can do that. And so we did it. I mean, she actually ended up selling her practice 10 years later, but we had to pay off the rest afterwards. But that was the start of becoming your own banker. And all we did was take that cash and we bought insurance policies. He actually insured my wife because if she would have died, that would have been a risk to him, right? So he insured her. He used that cash value to buy property and investment property with us. We've done all sort of different deals together. And I started doing the same thing. I just started putting my capital into it. I started growing my cash. And now Joey and I, for the last, 4 years now, we've been showing our personal passive income report. And it's gone from $2,400 a month when we first started back in July of 2020 to, I think this past month, we showed like $58,000 a month in passive income. And all of that is a result of us borrowing against our cash values and investing in assets and taking those cash values and replenishing the loans against those cash values at the insurance company.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned for people listening is you mentioned it kind of acts a little bit like a house in the sense of, if I put $100,000 in a policy, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I borrow that, say I can borrow 80,000, the insurance policy still shows it at 100,000. So the insurance policy is still accruing its own interest, or it's growing based on the 100,000, even though I pulled 80 out, which I'm paying 5% interest on it, but more than likely, if you're going to invest it, you should be making more than 5% on that investment. I think that's one of the key features of this is even though you pull the money out, that basis, just like your house, if you pull more equity out of your house continues to grow based off of its value. Insurance works that same way, correct?
You're exactly right. Like that's the unique part about this is that ultimately we win by not losing, right? Like if we can keep our money, we talked about Dave Ramsey, right? He hates whole life insurance, but what does he talk about? He gives this analogy of a debt snowball, right? As we start paying off one small debt to a bigger debt, and so forth. Well, what we do within the infinite banking concept is we create a cash snowball. We get our cash constantly growing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes. And to your point, instead of withdrawing cash, which is immediately ends the interest earnings on the money, which makes the snowball no longer be able to be rolled down the hill. The way that we are doing this, we're actually using the cash value as collateral, allowing our snowball to continue to grow and get bigger.
Okay.
And now we're using we're using the insurance company's money to go invest in different projects. And to your point, like, yes, we're borrowing at, typically somewhere around 5%, and we're making investments in projects. Well, real estate investors have always understood the concept of leverage, right? If I borrow at 5 and I earn 10, my return is not 5%. My return is 100% return on investment, right? Because I only had to give back the 5%. That was their money. So I got 100% return on investment. And when we get that, like, it's like, oh, that makes total sense to me. So my job is to not limit how much cash I have access to, which is what Wall Street does, right? Wall Street gets us to put money in accounts that we can't touch for 30 or 40 years. They want us to put it in this different alphabet soup, 401ks, IRAs, 529 plans, like all these different things that just separate us from our cash for long periods of time while they earn lots of fees off of it. And at the same time, now we're not able to use that cash to start creating the same sort of interest and fees for ourselves.
So one of the things you mentioned, and I never actually thought of this, let's say I had, and I'm just going to use hypothetical, $500,000 of cash value in that policy. I think you mentioned, and if I heard it right, is I don't even need to pull that money out. I could just use that as collateral, just like people use a stock portfolio and go to somebody and say, hey, look, I'll use this as the collateral. I'm not pulling the money out, but this is the security instrument to whatever it is you want to invest. Is that correct as well?
I've been doing that for a number of years now. Like, that's definitely a little more efficient process, right? That's an advanced model. That's the 3.0 model. But yes, when you can put your cash value up as collateral, right? Like, that's the safest instrument out there that I know of, because the banks that you're doing business with are decades old. Maybe there's some that are 100 years old. Well, these insurance companies we're doing business with, some of them are 250 years old. Like, we're doing business with some of the oldest financial institutions in America. Well, with that in mind, we're putting our money in the safest position it can possibly be. The risk to the insurance company is that you and I buy an insurance policy and we die tomorrow, right? Now, that's not really a risk given the fact that they're using the law of large numbers. They know a number of people are going to die early. The rest are going to have this curve. But as we borrow against our cash value, if we go to them and borrow it, all they're doing is reducing our death benefit. So if you had $1 million death benefit, you took $500,000 of cash out. Now, those numbers wouldn't actually be that way, but their death benefit requirement to pay your beneficiaries would be $500,000. So they're okay. They're just managing that liability of the death benefit. And I think that when I got my arms around the fact that I was able to use my death benefit while living to control the decision making in the process, and what real estate investors and business owners that we deal with really love about this concept, Chris, is that the fact that whenever they go and they're so used to going to the bank and getting a loan and having to bring their personal financial statement, they're having to have their credit pulled, they're having to answer the 100,000 questions that come along with all of that, and then they're set on some sort of payment schedule to repay it. They love it when they call the insurance company, and the insurance company asks them 2 questions: how much do you want, and where do you want us to send it? That's it. There's no credit check. There's no structured repayment, meaning that I have unscheduled payments. I can make a loan repayment if I want to. If I don't, it just tacks onto the loan. And that gives me ultimate flexibility if I'm a business owner, if I'm using it for investing purposes. Maybe a deal I'm doing is not going to cash flow for 3 months, 2 years. Well, then I don't have the pressure of having to make that repayment. I can repay it as my deal comes through. And that's allowed us to do a lot more investing over the years because of that.
And one thing that, and again, I know a lot of people out there, including myself, we all have egos, but I can tell you pretty much a guarantee is none of us are getting off this planet alive. And if you have life insurance, now eventually, that check is going to have to get cashed. It's my understanding, because unfortunately I had my father passed away several years ago, life insurance is not taxed. Correct. So if I get a check cut, the policy, something happens to me, my wife would get a check cut to her that would I believe it's excluded from like any type of probate or anything like that, but also it's not taxed. Am I?
So it is not subject to federal income tax.
Okay.
Now it could, and depending on how it's structured, right, and how it's owned, could fall within the estate of the owner of the contract. But I think we're at like 11.5 million or something like that individual estate gift limit. So for most people, they're not following in that. So to your point, most of the time the income money from the proceeds from the insurance company are not taxed, which is one of the things that was interesting to me, again, another reason why I rail on the 401k, my CPA, usually CPAs are heavily pro 401ks and IRAs because they love the tax reduction that 1 year, right? The year in which you contributed. They go blind into what's going to happen in the future. But one of the things that my CPA has said to me is like, man, every single client I've ever had who died with a 401k, I realized that is absolutely the worst instrument to own when you die. And I was like, I pretty much know what you're saying, but tell me why. He said, well, not only does the people who inherit the 401k, do they have to pay federal income tax as they get that money, right? And oftentimes, if the person who's been putting money in there and the people that are inherited have been doing a good job, that's 40-45% of it going out. He said, but if the person who owned the 401k really had a lot of money, then they're going to pay their 40 or 50% in estate tax. So both of those things. He said, so he's seen scenarios where the beneficiaries got as little as 5 or 10% of the actual account balance because of both federal income tax and estate tax being taken out of a 401k. And I think that's a real issue. And that as we are trying to build this thing of what we want, and if we really want to build generational wealth, we need to, what we like to say is build a moat around our safest asset. Like, back in the old days, the castles, they put this big moat around it, right? To protect you from all the, the outsiders, the people that were coming and try to rob and thieve what you have built. Well, I mean, there's so many different things that come at us from, creditors to governments to market losses and so on, that we need to build a moat around our safest assets, which are cash. And so it's just one of the many, many, many reasons why we love this tool. And we believe it is a tool, right? It's not something to be sit on the shelf and just will automatically give us all these benefits. No, we use it. And the better we are at using it, the more successful we are in the results.
One thing I just want to add to the podcast is neither Russ nor I are CPAs, and we're not providing legal, tax, or any type of investment advice. Gotta throw that out there.
100%.
Yeah. Well, I'm so used to doing it on webinars. It's like, okay, always gonna throw that catch-all, out there and stuff. And one of the things you mentioned about this, because sometimes it can be, people seem to have opinions on everything. And we joke about opinions, is you mentioned it's a tool, and it's the more you use it, the better you are at it. It's just like any investment strategy. You don't want to have just one tool in your toolbox. You want to have multiple tools in your toolbox. But this is, an avenue that it's very different. It's very unique. And, it's very intriguing because it allows you to do things and grow wealth differently than you can in most other investments. I wanted to make that comment as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
As we wrap up this episode, Russ, how can people learn more about Wealth Without Wall Street? Where can they find you? Where can they get more information about you?
Yeah. If you go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/wealth simplified, right? So we want to make that easy for your podcast listeners. So wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/wealth simplified. We've talked about a lot on here. We've talked about the investor DNA. I know people want to be like, hey, what's my investor DNA? And what does this passive income matrix look like? So you can get access to that. If you want to be one of those who read the book and get some of the very strategic steps that we put in there, there's a link for that. As well as sometimes people want to get on a call and they want to ask questions around infinite banking, for instance, or, how do I join your community? We always give a free call link in there. So that way you can talk to one of our coaches. 90% of our coaches, Chris, actually are former clients. It's people that were doing what they loved and having a lot of success in it. But they realized it wasn't their exact purpose. They felt more called to help other people become financially free like they had become financially free. So we have former CFOs, former pilots, people that were in the medical industry, a pastor. I mean, we have so many people that are on our team now, and they all were former clients. And so you'll be talking to one of them, and a lot of times those conversations revolve around, how did they get into this? What was those first steps? Because I know early on, it's like, what should I do first, right? Like, what's my right next thing?
Yeah, and I think one of your people was a mortgage-backed securities guy who I met at the conference, and I'm talking with him, and he's teaching me stuff, and I'm sitting there like, wow, this is awesome. Learning more about my business and about, infinite banking as well.
That's right.
Well, Russ, thanks for having you on today. People listening, all of this will be in the show notes as well. And I definitely recommend taking advantage of, that investor DNA and really understanding and looking into this. And Russ and Joey have built a very large membership and group of people with a lot of education in this to try and help you, again, grow your wealth throughout Wall Street. So Russ, thanks for coming on today. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining Lauren and I on this episode of the Creating Wealth Simplified podcast. Each week, we bring you expert education, experience, and information in a digestible format to help you identify investment opportunities so you can build wealth through real estate and take action toward your financial goals. Enjoy the show, share with a friend, or subscribe to the show and leave us a review.